Good afternoon. Welcome back. This is Geography 130, Lecture 9, according to the PowerPoint slides. I imagine it's 10 or 11, according to the podcast. Today we're going to talk about industrialization and the demographic transition. The readings that we'll be covering are chapters 3 and 4 from Livy Bacci. I have one housekeeping announcement to make here initially. That is the midterm. As I said last time, we will not hold class on Thursday the 4th of March, a week from Thursday. As a result, we have to figure out a different way of you turning in your midterms than we had planned, because we were going to have you turn them in at the beginning of lecture on Thursday the 4th. So we have talked about this, the GSIs and myself, and we've arrived at this plan. The midterm will be due on Friday the 5th. We will ask you to turn it in hard copy in 507 McCone Hall, which is Dolores Dillard's office. She's the receptionist for the geography department. She will have two boxes there in her office. One will say Nathan and the other will say Javier. We'd ask that you put your GSI's name on your exam and also put your exam in the right box so that we don't have to separate them ourselves. Dolores' office is closed at lunch from noon to 1. I'm going to talk to Dolores and figure out exactly what her schedule looks like that day. My expectation is that the exams will be due at about 4 o'clock, give or take, on Friday. Okay? I will specify that further by email to you all. Because we're pushing it back a day, we're also going to push back the distribution of the midterm by a day. And rather than handing it out in person on Thursday, this Thursday, we're going to post it to BSpace and send you an announcement to that effect on Friday. And I will assure you that announcement, that posting of the midterm, will be at least a week before it's due. So if it's due at 4 p.m. on the 5th of March, I will get it posted before 4 p.m. this Friday. As I think I said before, the format of the midterm will consist of 3, possibly 4 questions, of which you will be asked to answer 2. You can choose the 2 that you want. Each answer should be in the ballpark of 4 to 5 pages, double-spaced, 12-point font, watch your margins, that kind of thing, so that the total should be 8 to 10 pages, double-spaced. Are there any questions about that? Yeah. Can you turn it in earlier than Friday? Yes, that would be fine. How much earlier do you have in mind? If you're not on campus on Friday, and you're, I guess what I'll do is make sure the boxes are there by like Thursday morning. Is that all right? Okay. Any other questions about the midterm? Okay. So, a couple of little distractions or digressions that caught my eye that I thought we'd talk about to kick this off. This was a blog posted to the New York Times website recently by a guy named Timothy Egan. He writes about Western issues, and it was entitled Slumburbia, and it was bylined right in this part of the world, Lathrop, California. He talks about Lathrop and Manteca. And Tracy, how many of you have been there or been through those places? You have a sense of where we're talking about, right? We're talking about the outer suburbs of the Bay Area, roughly, right? And the financial crisis has wreaked havoc on the real estate market in these areas. These are areas where huge numbers of houses were built during the housing boom. A lot of these houses are now in foreclosure. He says, in a decade, they, and he's talking about the people in these areas, saw real property defy reality in real time as these instant neighborhoods that sprouted in what had been some of the world's most productive farmland. In places like Lathrop, Manteca, and Tracy, population nearly doubled in 10 years, and home prices tripled. Now, median home prices have fallen from $500,000 to $150,000, among the most precipitous drops in the nation. And still, the houses sit empty, spooky, and see-through, waiting on demography and psychology to catch up. And he describes that there's gang tags on the real estate signs, and there's big discounts being offered on these houses, but the neighborhoods are basically desolate. There's nobody around. I think there's nationwide a record 2.8 million homes received foreclosure notices last year, up from 119% from 2 years ago, up 119% from 2 years ago. Just under 5 million homeowners, 1 in 10 mortgages, owe more than their houses are worth. He describes one of these suburbs. He says 1 in 8 houses in one of these suburbs is in some stage of foreclosure. What to make of this? And he talked briefly about prognostications that have been written according to which the suburbs, which were previously where the middle class, upper middle class tended to live, are soon to become slums, and that they will, that when all this shakes out, these McMansions that were built as kinds of palaces for the affluent and highly leveraged people would in fact become undesirable, run down perhaps, that they will subsequently become either desolate or the home of the poor working class rather than the middle class and upper middle class. But Timothy Egan disputes this. He disagrees. He says, no, that's not what's going to happen. He says, through immigration and high birth rates, the United States is expected to add another 100 million people by 2050. If you don't believe me, consider that we've added 105 million people since 1970. This is more than the population of France, more than Italy, more than Germany. Currently, we have a net gain of 1 person every 13 seconds. In his estimation, the suburbs will in fact persist. They will recover and revive over time, if for no other reason than that the United States continues to have a growing population, and these houses will therefore find adequate demand to fill them. What do you think will happen in Tracy? How many of you are familiar with these types of neighborhoods? Any thoughts about what should happen with them? Or what will happen? Do you think Egan's right? Yeah. Okay, it might depend on the price of fuel, which will affect whether living that far away from job centers is a desirable and affordable thing to do. Yeah. Okay, it might depend on public transportation. If they develop adequate mass transit, these places can be commutable, even if the price of gasoline is high, and you therefore might be able to sustain them as, again, sort of commuting bedroom communities for San Francisco, the East Bay, that kind of thing. Why do you think these places got built in the first place? Yeah.
The housing bubble, shifty loan practices allowed banks to loan to people who couldn't afford them.
Okay, there was extremely cheap credit. It was extremely easy to get a mortgage, arguably mortgages that many people couldn't actually afford. They could still qualify for them and use them to buy these houses. Yeah. Cheap land. Okay, it's interesting to note that, yes, the land was cheap compared to land in, say, San Francisco or Berkeley, but it, as he notes, was, in fact, some of the most productive farmland in the country, in the world, arguably. And compared to agricultural land values in most places, this land was probably actually pretty expensive from an agricultural point of view. Nonetheless, I think you're right. Compared to what could be made by turning it into houses, the land was cheap, so the profits were good. Yes. Was it still agriculturally productive when they decided to build on it? I believe yes. I mean, in some cases, they had to remove orchards. It's certainly not the case that the soil was ruined. I mean, again, this is, yeah, California has got remarkable agricultural land. Yeah. Okay. Excellent marketing of the idea that owning a home is an extremely high ideal to try to aspire to. Did you have something next to him there? You in the yellow shirt? Did you have something? No? Anyone else? Yeah. Okay, there's an attraction to the McMansion ideal, the large home. The idea that for the same price, you can get a much bigger house, a much bigger lot out there than you can afford, say, in San Francisco.
There's also the idea that for some reason it's like safer to raise kids than other than
All right, there's a lot of popular imagination according to which it's a better neighborhood in which to raise children compared to the city, whether it's because of crime or schools or you name it. Yeah. Maybe they could fill the houses if there were new jobs out there, new industry of some kind. Okay, there's obviously that will have an effect on these markets. I guess I want to draw attention right now. I mean, this raises a bunch of the questions that we've been discussing. I mean, on the one hand, it raises the question of the size of households, right? Not measured only in terms of the number of people who live in each household, but also in terms of the square footage of the houses and the lots that they sit on. The correlations there in terms of environmental impacts are also quite good. Not only do we have smaller numbers of people living in each household than is true most places and in most of history, but we also actually have increasing house sizes, which has a very powerful effect on the amount of energy that's used, that sort of thing. We're also looking here at the question of this sort of transition between using land for agriculture to grow food versus using land for other purposes. And the disparity between land values for agricultural purposes versus others, including residential purposes, has a very powerful effect on the pattern of building and urbanization. And then finally, I want to draw attention to this phenomenon of this bubble, right? That this is not a case in which there was some kind of smooth relationship between the growing number of people needing housing and the supply of housing for them. In many ways, this was the building of housing above and beyond the direct needs of the population, or at least beyond what the population could afford. And the creation of this bubble was motivated by financial factors that influenced mortgage practices and the availability of credit, and has led up to this bubble bursting and creating this situation of slumburbia, or perhaps incipient slumburbia. And I would suggest to you that that's actually, it might be an extreme example of the ways in which markets work, but it's not anomalous. It's not atypical. In fact, it's quite common. It happens again and again and again and again. And here's something from the New York Times early in 2008, so about 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, slightly before we saw the total meltdown of the financial sector and mortgage-backed securities in particular. And this caught my eye just because I guess I find it somewhat humorous. More Americans are giving up golf. In many parts of the country, high expectations for a golf bonanza. I certainly had high expectations for a golf bonanza. Paralleling baby boomer retirements led to what is now considered a vast overbuilding of golf courses. Between 1990 and 2003, developers built more than 3,000 new golf courses in the United States, bringing the total to about 16,000. Several hundred have closed in the last few years. And they went on to talk about the concerns of the golfing industry, that they were somehow failing to capture the attention of the youth, failing to continue to build their market. This is, of course, pre-Tiger Woods meltdown. Nonetheless, there was apparently this sort of failure of the market, the demand to materialize that had been anticipated. And this is actually linked quite closely to that housing boom, right? Because a lot of these golf courses were actually put in as parts of subdivisions. And in many cases, the golf course was actually a secondary part of the overall package. The main package was, from a financial point of view, was the houses to be built along the sides and surrounding this golf course, because owning a McMansion next to a golf course is even better than just owning a McMansion, according to the logic, anyway. And there's some complicated history, too, here having to do with zoning and practices of the Federal Housing Administration. In a lot of places, if you want to develop a whole bunch of houses, you also have to leave a certain amount of your land undeveloped as sort of open space considerations, that kind of thing. And curiously, sometime actually quite a while ago now, 30 or 40 years ago, it was decided by the zoning powers, both federal and state, that golf courses counted as open space. And so putting in a golf course was a convenient way of fulfilling that requirement, even while you put houses up on every other last inch of land. So this was an amenity. Well, it turns out that the decline in demand for golf was causing some of these struggling golf courses to start doing other things to try to make money, to try to raise revenue. And so they were renting out the clubhouse, for example, for weddings and parties and events of various kinds. And some of the people living in the houses next to the golf course were finding this highly unpleasant and disappointing. Dominique Mendez, whose home was about 600 feet from the 18th hole, said, "We bought our house here because we wanted to live in a quiet place, and we thought a golf course would be nice to see from a window. Instead, people have to turn up their air conditioners or wear earplugs at night because of the music thumping. During weddings, she said, you can hear the DJ, 'We're gonna do the garter.' It's a little much." My sympathies, profound sympathies, go out to Dominique Mendez. Again, to suggest that these dynamics of oversupply, speculative building in anticipation of, or creating, trying to supply a market that you anticipate will emerge based on current trends, and then discovering that maybe you didn't anticipate, maybe you didn't personally exaggerate the growth of the market, but the collective behavior of all of you golf course developers together created an oversupply. And that oversupply then, as a result of pulling the profit margins out from underneath whatever it is you're doing, and causing these types of restructurings, retrenchments. Again, just to suggest that this shouldn't be seen as somehow anomalous, these moments when there is a failure of the system of supply and demand to equilibrate, right? The great mantra of standard economics is that markets will clear at the margins, right? That there will be equilibrium between supply and demand at some market price, and that this will ensure an optimal distribution of goods and services, and by extension, an optimal building out of whatever the infrastructure, the built environment might happen to be. Now, all I'm offering here is the notion that if you even postulate the existence of equilibrium, you also have to allow for the likelihood that there will be moments when you're not in equilibrium, because otherwise how would you even know that the forces tended towards equilibrium, right? In other words, the operation of some kind of supply and demand countervailing forces that find an equilibrium presupposes that they are in fact separate, and they do tend over time back towards each other, but there's no guarantee that they will simply always be at equilibrium. And in a lot of ways, if you read Adam Smith, and then you put Adam Smith down and you turn and read Karl Marx, in a lot of ways, they are simply emphasizing those two sides of the same picture. They're recognizing these dynamics, and in many ways, these dynamics are very similar in both cases. But Smith is going to emphasize the equilibrium and say that's what markets are about. And Marx is going to emphasize the disequilibrium and point out that in order to arrive at an equilibrium, there are going to have to be these moments where things shake out, right? They're going to have to be moments when, like this, the value of homes or the value of golf courses drops because there's been a kind of oversupply, an overshoot. Marx is going to suggest that these imbalances are actually what we should take to be as normal because the dynamic processes of capitalist growth ensure that things are always changing, and it's only after these things have interacted over time that they can even begin to tend towards an equilibrium. And so whereas Malthus and most of economics focuses almost exclusively on scarcity, their defining concern is scarcity and the idea of scarce resources that markets allocate. For the Marxists, the emphasis is almost always on surplus. And a surplus, of course, is in many ways just the inside out, the inverse of a scarcity, right? In order for there to be scarcity, it has to be scarcity of something in relation to something else. So there is not enough food for the number of people who need food. There are not enough jobs relative to the number of people who are looking for work. And you could say, okay, well, jobs are scarce. Or you could say, no, the number of people who are looking for work is oversupplied. There's a surplus of them. And Marx is going to say these surpluses, these imbalances between supply and demand, are actually defining characteristics of capitalism. And for every surplus, there's a scarcity, right? Because there's always too much of something in relation to something else. There are too many golf courses relative to the number of people who want to play golf or live next to golf courses and pay for the houses that are located there. Okay. Any questions or thoughts? Yeah. What did he think the social ramifications of the surplus would be? It depends on what's in surplus at any given moment, right? So you can have a surplus of goods looking to find buyers, right? You can have too many golf courses and not enough buyers. That has certain kinds of social ramifications. It hurts the developers of the golf courses, right? You can also have a surplus of houses relative to demand, which in this case hurts the people who own those houses, right? Those millions of people who owe more than their houses are worth right now are essentially victims of an oversupply of housing. Then again, that oversupply of housing reflects a previous oversupply of credit, of capital to buy houses with, which benefited people trying to buy houses until it turned out that their houses weren't worth as much as they owe, right? As far as what we discussed last time, Marx is going to say, well, one surplus that is sort of endemic to this situation is a surplus of people relative to jobs. And for those people, what the surplus means is chronic unemployment or underemployment, declining wages, competition for jobs. And those social ramifications are obviously can be seen in all kinds of different places in different ways at different points in time, and they don't have any preset outcome, right? Depends on what kinds of political agitation might arise from that. Okay, now for the actual material in our lecture. The basic question here in these two chapters from Livy-Bacci, and in a sense, this is the basic question that Smith and Malthus and Marx are also all asking, is this: does population lead to poverty, or does it lead to prosperity? What's the relationship between population growth and economic activity, economic growth? Obviously, at the end of the day, perhaps we're going to conclude that this is a false dichotomy or a false question, that there is no single answer to the question, does population growth cause poverty or does it cause prosperity? As we've seen already from Malthus, the basic gist of his answer is population growth creates misery and vice, poverty. Adam Smith arrived at a framework in which, no, population growth could, in fact, lead to prosperity. It could be both a symptom of growing economic wealth and, in some respects, a cause of growing economic well-being and activity, right? Marx doesn't have a single answer in general to this. He's got an answer that applies to capitalist economics alone. He doesn't really speculate about an answer more generally than that. He doesn't think there's a single law of population that applies no matter what. He thinks there's a particular law of population that operates in the context of capitalism, and that what it produces is, in fact, both of these things simultaneously. It produces prosperity for some and poverty for others, and that you can't, in fact, have the one without the other. So this is from Livy-Bacci. The first position, and this is the generally Malthusian position, finds immediate and short-term empirical verification. And he has here sort of generalized or watered down the Malthusian position to simply say, if there are more people competing for the same amount of resources, then there will be a relative increase in scarcity of resources or a relative increase in competition for those resources. And you will see the effects of this in things like rising prices, right? Historical observation, however, presents a valid objection to this position, as economic progress is generally accompanied by demographic growth. The reconciliation of short and long-term observations has not proved to be easy. He's suggesting that if you look at certain places and times, you can find empirical support for the general notion that population growth leads to a smaller supply per capita of whatever it is that matters, the resources in question, and therefore to rising prices and a competition for resources. However, if you expand your view and look over longer periods of time and look over larger areas, it begins to look as though that, in fact, is not an adequate way of thinking about what's going on. You can, in fact, find instances of growth in population that is accompanied not by relative deprivation or a decline in living standards, but by equal or even much greater economic growth on a per capita basis.